Good evening all, and welcome to our discussion on the Haggadah as literature. My name is Meir Soloveichik. As the director of the Straus Center and the Rabbi and Minister of Shearith, Israel, it's my delight to welcome you all here this evening to this event, which is co-sponsored by the Straus Center and by the Synagogue. I want to express my gratitude to Moshel and Zahava Straus, who are not here this evening, but they are out celebrating Moshel's birthday, so I want to wish Moshel a very happy birthday. I want to thank as well the Parnas of Shearith Israel, Louis Solomon, who also could not be here this evening. I do want to recognize our previous Parnas, David Nathan, who is here this evening. And I want to recognize several cherished members of the Yeshiva University community, Ruth and Erwin Shapiro from the Yeshiva University Board, and Joel Schreiber, the chairman of the board of REITs, who's also a member of this congregation. And Joel, where are you actually? You're here somewhere. Here you are. Yes, there you are. And Joel has confessed to me that he's converting to Sephardic Judaism as well. And REITs is next, I think. That's our next step. Before we begin our evening, I also want to take note of several other events, Straus Center events that will be taking place soon, and there are flyers outside which will give you all the information. Our next pre-Pesach event, which is co-sponsored by the Synagogue, will take place here in the Synagogue at 10 a.m. this Sunday, and will feature the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, delivering the Rabbi Alan Mervis lecture, which will be a major pre-Pesach shiur. Please come join us here again at 10 a.m. And at the Yeshiva University Museum on Wednesday, April 13th, we will have a panel on the image of the Haggadah featuring Mark Michael Epstein, Ronnie Perelis, Madar Rosenzweig, and Meir Soloveichik for a discussion of the images and aesthetic of the Haggadah. Straus Center's newest book, Torah and Western Thought, Intellectual Portraits of Orthodoxy and Modernity, is available outside. I know it's done very well, I'm proud to say. It is one of the YU Sfarim sale bestsellers, though I think we did not succeed in outselling Kosher by Design. We could not compete with the latest edition of the Kosher by Design cookbook, but nevertheless, it is a hot-selling book. We're selling the movie rights. Brad Pitt will be playing one of the members of the Soloveichik family in the film version as well. And please check out our book if you have not seen it yet. For our discussion this evening, it's my great privilege to welcome back Leon Wieseltier, one of the most distinguished public intellectuals and literary critics in America, the Isaiah Berlin Senior Fellow in Culture and Policy at the Brookings Institution. Our guest is also serving for this semester as the Distinguished Visiting Scholar at the Straus Center, and in this capacity, he has been leading a graduate-level seminar in which I've had the great zechut of serving as co-teacher. The title of the seminar is Mendelssohn and His American Friends, and the subject, the goal of the course conceived by our guest, is to examine the book Jerusalem, one of the important works of Jewish thought, written by Moses Mendelssohn, and examining its impassioned arguments for religious freedom, and showing students how there are striking similarities between these Jewish arguments for religious freedom being made in Enlightenment Germany to the arguments being made across the ocean by the founding fathers of the United States. As one who has merited to take part in this course, and as one who has known our guest for some time, I have now emerged as Leon's, if I may say, Talmid Chaver, one who has both learned a tremendous amount from him about the classics of Jewish thought, as well as the thought of the founding fathers, a love for which we both share. But I feel very honored to say that I am not only his student, but also that he is my dear friend. Please join me in welcoming our guest this evening. I want to frame our discussion by citing something, Leon, that you once personally said to me. And I thought of this after I noted the striking statistic that more commentaries have been written on the Haggadah than on any other Jewish book, save for the Torah itself. In 1975, the historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi recorded that at that point, 437 commentaries had been published on the Haggadah, probably hundreds and hundreds since then. You once said to me the following. You said, and correct me if I don't get this right, you said that you think the most beautiful word in the English language is philosophy. And the most beautiful word in the Hebrew language, in the Hebrew language, is Rashi, which, as I understood it, refers to the Jewish penchant for interpretation. And so, what is uniquely Jewish about interpretation? And why do you think the Haggadah has become the most commented upon rabbinic text in Jewish history?
Well, I think, firstly, that our religion consists essentially in interpretation. That's its originality and its radicalism. I think that the people who created our religion in the mists of time taught us this when, for example, they instructed us to believe that the oral Torah, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, was also revealed to Moses at Sinai. So that as we lost a direct relationship with divinity and had to make do with various forms of indirection, we would nonetheless never come to believe that there was anything not sacred about our activity as interpreters. And not just our activity as interpreters, but the centrality of interpretation in Judaism also means that Judaism has been able to evolve. That is how we evolved. You remember there's that beautiful midrash about Moses finding himself in Rabbi Akiva's class and not understanding a word. That is the midrashic refutation of originalism.
Which is an incredibly audacious midrash.
An incredibly audacious midrash. And it's not, and Moses sits in the back humbly and accepts the fact that he doesn't rebel against this, and he doesn't accuse those who promulgate what he doesn't understand as sectarians or deviationists or God forbid heretics, or quite the contrary. The idea is that interpretation is an infinite and open-ended activity, and it's all we have in the, not only is it all we have in the absence of revelation. The more I think about this, the more I think that actually interpretation may even be a more secure basis for faith than revelation.
Why is that?
Well, I sometimes, every Shavuos at our Tikkun, I give a talk, and for about 10 years now, I've been trying to make the same point in 10 different ways, which is that, in my view, the Israelites who stood at Sinai were spiritually disadvantaged, and that we have the spiritual advantage over them. Let me explain why. The Israelites who stood at Sinai based their faith upon the experience of their senses. The sense experience is a notoriously fallible, manipulable, and untrustworthy basis for anything. We know this even from the status of the relative lack of authority of sense experience in courtrooms, where things have to be verified and so on. Because they were always basing their faith on the experience of their senses, the Israelites in the desert kept requiring more and more revelations, more and more miracles. Because they kept requiring more and more miracles, they came to depend on miracles for their faith, to the point at which Moses' 40-day absence from them threw them into a panic because they didn't have the inner spiritual resources of their own upon which to base a secure foundation for their belief. I've always thought, for example, that when Moses asks God at the end of, after the episode of the golden calf, and he says, Hareini nat kvodecha, show me your glory, I've always been infinitely grateful that the Kadosh Baruch Hu turned him down, for the simple reason that if he hadn't, we would be forever hostage to the description of what Moses' sense experience was like. And that would have been very crippling spiritually. We know from the biblical account of the Sinaitic revelation that the sense experience became, in fact, so confusing. Remember, they heard the lightning and saw the thunder, right, and became so overwhelming that they actually asked for it to stop because it was too much. And too much, when it comes to basing a belief, is actually too little. Whereas we are in the position of not being able to rely on miracles and not being able to count on direct communication. And so we must rely upon our minds. And when the mind begins to do its work seriously, it can reason or interpret its way to a secure foundation for faith that isn't captive to all the exigencies of sense experience. There's a passage, Oscar Wilde wrote a play about Herod called Salome, and there's a moment in the play where Herod and Herodias are sitting outdoors and there's a shooting star, and Herod says, it's a miracle, and Herodias says, I don't believe in miracles, I've seen too many. So I think that interpretation is what we do. That is the essence of our activity as Jews.
And the Haggadah, the Seder is itself, even the Haggadah itself is an exercise in interpretation,
it's a class. It is a pedagogical exercise. Right. Some of it addressed, maybe too much addressed to the children, some of it addressed to the adults, but it is actually, it's two things, and we can get to what the other thing is in a moment, but one of the things it is a review of certain rabbinical interpretations of certain
especially
verses.
Arami Oved Avi.
Arami Oved Avi, all the way down to right, Ditzach Hadash Be'achav.
But that's the whole Talmud. Why has this book engendered so many more commentaries written on it, do you think?
Well, I think that, the reason for the popularity of the Haggadah, I think, is clear, which is that it is...
as a work of, why is it as a work of literature inspire?
Because, firstly, as I say, it's available to Jews at every level. Secondly, it is the liturgy for a meal, and there's nothing like food to focus, right? And I'm not even making a Jewish joke here.
Right.
I think
this is an actual pedagogical
I think it's
point.
Actually,
Exactly.
And I think, and also because it probably is, in a way, the most succinct statement of all that Jews believe. If you had to pick one of our canonical texts, liturgical texts, right, and look in it for the full panoply of Jewish belief and Jewish historical experience, you'd probably pick the Haggadah.
Striking, because it's A, true, but B, it's the one text in which Moshe never comes up, right? Or Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't appear.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. That's true. I have to say, I think that Moshe Rabbeinu comes up in quite a good many places. There's no reason to...
He's covered.
He's covered.
He's
covered.
And they show the Ten Commandments before Easter also, so we can see the video footage of Moshe Rabbeinu. Lahavdil as well, so we have it covered.
No, look, you can't really understand what the Haggadah is unless you think through what the Seder is. And I think what happens at the Seder, the central principle of the Seder is the principle of ki'ilu. B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa. Now, this ki'ilu, this as if, what this means is that the Seder is a ritual in which we agree to abolish time and abolish space. Yeah. This is not true, by the way, of almost any of our other rituals in which we insist on being actually present to our reality, to our present circumstances, and sanctifying them. At the Seder, we actually abolish time and abolish space so that we imaginatively recreate an experience. The collective memory, which is what the Seder is one of the most powerful instruments of collective memory in Jewish culture. The thing about the paradox, the mystery of collective memory is that we come to remember something that didn't happen to us. That is to say, what happens in collective memory is that an event that happened long before us becomes so vivid to us that we become so emotionally present in it that we feel correct in describing it as a memory, when in fact we're not remembering a thing. What we possess is knowledge.
So this seems like a good time to actually mention something that you wrote. You several years ago gave a review in the Jewish Review of Books of a book called The New American Haggadah. With the translation, it featured two prominent young Jews in American letters. It was translated by Nathan Englander and was edited by Jonathan Safran Foer. Can read the whole article. It's an excellent essay. Suffice it to say, you didn't like the book, the Haggadah, very much. By very much, I mean at all. But what struck me immediately when I read it was your take on Englander's translation of Shechianu. And he translated Shechianu as, "You are blessed, Lord God of us, King of the cosmos, who breathed life and sustained life and shepherded us through to the current season." I don't think there's a single word you liked in it, even I think the word "the" maybe, I think you didn't like.
Not even the.
Not even the, okay. But you wrote, but I just want to focus on the last part. And you wrote, "It sounds like this translation like the hackwork of a music critic or a sports writer and misrepresents the nature of the Birkat Hazman, the blessing over time. The time that the Shechianu hallows is not a mere now, it is cyclical time. We give the blessing is prescribed for a moment that has come round again, an appointed hour that regularly arrives. We give gratitude for witnessing another turn in the turning without end, and therefore perhaps for catching a glimpse of eternity. This moment is not current, this moment is recurrent." So we hear a lot about Jews gave the world linear time, but you're saying that actually a very different thing is happening here.
Well,
right?
I think that we have both the line and the circle in our conceptions of time. Certainly in our conception of historical time is linear and teleological, and it will one day presumably have the endpoint that we describe as the Messianic age.
Right.
And it's linear, there's no question about it. But the calendar is not linear, the calendar is cyclical. The calendar is cyclical partly because of its association with the changes of the seasons, with natural occurrences, which is explicit in our tradition. And it's cyclical because we learn to appreciate the moment, but also the return of the moment. We're experiencing it again. The Shechianu has become, for obvious reasons, the most popular blessing among Jews, but one of the reasons it's popular is because it kind of expresses the way in which contemporary men and women live only in the present, the kind of sensationalism, so that when something unprecedentedly wonderful happens to us, we say the Shechianu.
So you say the Shechianu actually refers to the exact opposite of how it's used.
I think the more traditional meaning and the deeper meaning of the Shechianu is that it is about the appreciation of the return of a certain day or a certain experience. And with each of those returns, the experience becomes more profound as it becomes more familiar to us. Yes, so that we thank God for bringing us this again, which is in some ways a deeper kind of gratitude.
And not just that it's again in the present, but we're transported.
Well, yes. Well, in the case
back.
of the Seder, certainly, as I say, it is about the imagination of the past becoming so vivid as to abolish the present. And we do this theatrically. We do it with the pillow, with Mesubin. We do it with the matzah and the morah. We have these props for this exercise of the abolition of time and space. But mainly, we do it through narrative. I mean, aside from the hermeneutical parts of the Haggadah are really enclosed within a framework of narrative, and the claim that the Haggadah makes is that there's a special kind of knowledge that only narrativity can provide. There is in Abravanel's commentary on the Haggadah, which we can talk about, he has this beautiful passage that's always meant a lot to me. When he at kulanu chachamim, kulanu nivonim, kulanu lomdim et Torah, mitzvah aleinu l'saper. Okay, even though all of us are smart and all of us are wise and all of us know the Torah, it is incumbent upon us to tell the story. And he says that chachamim refers to scientific knowledge, nivonim refers to metaphysical knowledge, yodim et Torah refers to law and living a halachic life. And what he therefore says is that all of these other kinds of knowledge on this night are not adequate to convey the sort of knowledge of the event that we need. And he posits that the telling of the story, the experience of narrativity, is actually, you'll pardon the 50-cent word, is an epistemological achievement of its own.
That transcends scientific knowledge.
Well, in this instance, that it's another avenue of access. So if you're among Chokrei HaTeva, and if you know, Hamalot v'Hakavod, and if you know Halacha, as he said, that's all very nice, but the Haggadah tells us tonight that won't cut it. Tonight we're looking for an awareness, a knowledge of a particular event so immediate and so vivid to us that it can only be established by the telling of the story, and the story will lead us to feel as if we are actually remembering the event. And as I say, it's very important to be aware that the word remember in collective memory is really, strictly speaking, used metaphorically. But it refers to a knowledge so intimate, and you find all these, the identification of Jews with biblical figures and rabbinical figures. Right. We repeat this exercise. I mean, there's a famous story about Rav Kook, which you will like and I don't, that about him standing
sacrifices?
No, that's another thing that you like and I don't.
Yeah, okay.
No. But him standing at the kotel and weeping because he was a Kohen, and he told someone that for him, he goes there and he sees all the things he's not doing.
Ooh, that's
right?
a great story.
It's a great story, but what he was doing there was reimagining it so intensely
that he's there.
That it was such an identification, it was so profound that he actually felt the absence of the activity.
Right. So this is obviously in tension with a modern historical approach to the past, right? That's the thesis of Yerushalmi's book Zachor. And this...
It's a problem. It's a problem because on the one hand, yes, there is a tension between history and memory, and they each have their strengths. But right now we're living in a time in which historians and philosophers have swooned over memory. Sometimes I think that memory has become a kind of secular mysticism for us. And everyone has pointed out the limitations of scholarship and of history for purposes of identity formation, which is true. You cannot raise children on scholarship, on academic
studies. Right?
You can't do that. And for the purpose of creating a culture and animating a culture and transmitting a culture, it's clear that scholarship or critical history won't suffice. However, it's also worth pointing out that memory is a notoriously fallible faculty, easily manipulable. There is no remembering where there is not forgetting. Whoever named the computer what the computer holds memory perpetrated a great hoax on all of us, because it's not a memory, it's an inventory. We remember things only because we also forget things. We edit our memories for certain purposes and according to certain principles, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. And it is important to remember the fallibility of memory and to be able to correct memory with history. So it's this constant swaying back and forth. And, there are many, many examples of this. I mean, the one that comes to mind, the most famous one, actually is not a Jewish example at all. It was about something that took place a few blocks from here at Lincoln Center. There was a very famous ballet critic named Edwin Denby, a well-known poet in New York, who reviewed dance for the Daily News for a while. And he once wrote a very famous review of a certain ballet by Balanchine. And in his review, being a poet, he had a very famous sentence, it became famous overnight, that at one point in the ballet, the man lifts the woman up on the diagonal and lowers her to the floor like a knife into a wound. It's an unforgettable sentence. The only problem with it is that it never happened on stage. He was simply misremembering. And so the mistakes of memory and the partisanship of memory and the volatility of memory is something that we have to bear in mind. So it's always history and memory.
Right, because on the one hand, when you collapse past and present, you can transport the present into the past.
That's right. You always can do that.
And you'll end up with, like, my kids' coloring books, which have everybody wearing Strimals, in the midbar.
Exactly.
As
with art scroll.
Yes.
Not to put too fine a point on
Obviously.
it, but it's just,
tell us what you really think about art scroll.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
On the other hand, I joked about the Ten Commandments, but there is actually an amazing story. DeMille, before he made the Ten Commandments that we all know, which is the cinematic achievement of the modern age, he actually made a silent version of the Ten Commandments in the 1920s. And he filmed that one in the desert of California. And for the extras, he took European, Orthodox Jewish European immigrants just off the boat to play the Israelites leaving Egypt. And as they're leaving, as they're filming the scene of leaving Mitzrayim, and they're going through this set of the gates of Pharaoh, not out of acting, they're crying as they're reliving this story, as well as sort of merging the freedom that they now just experienced in America. And then the article writes that without being told to do so, an elderly woman, one of these extras, as they walk out of the gates leaving Mitzrayim, turns around, this is on a set, faces the gates of Pharaoh and shakes her fist, at the gates.
Well, yeah.
So this shows that collective memory, on the other hand, is the only way, to some extent, to inspire people like that and to feel as if they knew this story and they're written on their minds and their hearts.
think that one of the most powerful instruments for the survival of the Jewish tradition certainly has been collective memory, in the sense that this idea that what we possess has been passed down to us. It begins, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, the chain, basically, the chain of tradition. But the problem, again, and we've talked about this in our seminar, the problem is that for thinkers like Halevi, well, never mind Halevi, the Ramban at some point, in one of his commentaries, says, I think it's for Sha'al Avicha v'Yagedcha, he says something like, ask your father and he will tell you. He said something like, Avot einan mitnachlim shkarim livnehem, that parents do not tell lies to their children. Now, I don't know who his parents were, but it is practically one of the obligations of parenthood to lie to one's children about various things at various times. And the Chassam Sofer, in a responsa in 1840, which means after the creation of critical scholarship and critical historiography, says exactly the same thing. That now we know that that's not true, that there's something phenomenally naive about that. And that if you study closely historical testimony, for example, if you compare the Ramban's account of his disputation at Barcelona with the Latin protocols of it, or if you compare the chronicles of the Crusades with the very meager evidence there are in Latin chronicles of the Crusades, it turns out that, like all writers, the chroniclers were making emphases. They were interpreting. And it's very important to be able to maintain this idea of the chain of tradition without becoming hopelessly naive about what happens to fact over time,
Yeah. So I want to turn to something else that you wrote in this review. This Haggadah that you were reviewing featured a series of essays by prominent American Jews, which you liked around as much as you liked the translation. And you wrote in the review that a lot of these essays seem more interested in raising questions than in giving answers. And then you write as follows: "This is appropriate, I guess, for the night of the 4 questions. But those questions, remember, are for the children to ask. The adults are supposed to be less interrogative than instructive, to be unembarrassed by the claim that they are in possession of answers. Contrary to its contemporary reputation, the Haggadah is more about the prestige of answers than the prestige of questions." And this is an excellent point, and I think everybody misses today. And I would actually just add to this that if you look at the Rambam, it's very clear from the Rambam that even the Manishtana is not a series of questions. Because how can it be? The kid, if it's supposed to be asked in genuine wonderment, how could the kid say, how do you know? We haven't gone through the Seder yet. It can't be that those are genuine questions. I mean, if you know he's been prepared by, I don't think in Maimonides' time he was prepared, the kid, by the Jewish day school, right, to come in and to ask this question in 4 languages. So actually, for Rambam, what this is that the kid says, "What's going on here?" And the adult answers, "Don't you understand how different this night is from all the nights? Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol." It's so different.
Well, the only question in the Haggadah that really sounds like a question is mazot.
Mazot, right.
That's a question.
That's a question.
That's a question.
So, and all the Shebachol Elot, that's the part of the answer to explain how different the night is. So, how have we lost this notion that the Haggadah is first and foremost about answers? Is there something that makes us...
We live in a time in which people believe either that certainty is impossible or that certainty is oppressive. But those are the 2 options. For various reasons, philosophical and cultural, we live in an era that some people refer to as our reigning doctrine is what some people call perspectivism. Other people call it relativism. But basically, there is this nervousness about answers because people fear that if you claim to have the answer, then you're either expressing power, right, or which is the political critique of this kind of certainty, or you're attempting to shut down the conversation. Your answer must be definitive, and the conversation is over. Now, both these things are wrong, I think. And you see this everywhere. I mean, today or yesterday in the New York Times, they have that silly feature called The Stone of philosophers writing pieces. Oh, yeah. And today's great contribution to philosophy was one called God is not an answer, God is a question. That was a kind of romantic existentialist way of softening the subject up.
Because the moment you make any claim with certainty about God...
Well, but here's the thing. No certainty is perfect, and every answer may be challenged.
Right.
That is why when I say that I believe in answers and not in questions, I use answers in the plural. There will always be many answers.
Even the Haggadah itself says davar acher, etc.
Davar acher.
Right.
There will always be many answers. So and that, by the way, is not an invitation to relativism or perspectivism. It simply has to do with the fact that different minds reason their way to different conclusions, often with equal rigor. So the plurality of answers should save us from any guilt about seeking answers and believing in the possibility of answers. But the plurality of answers should also not release us from the sense that that what we're seeking are answers. that what we're seeking are answers. And sometimes the preference for questions over answers is an expression of intellectual despair, which is people find it hard to live without answers, which is perfectly understandable. But that frustration doesn't change the philosophical situation. Many people find it hard to live without love, but they don't for that reason stop believing in love or stop dating, right? So I think that, I think one needs to restore the prestige of not just of the answer, but of the possibility of certainty and of objectivity, both.
Well, you note in the review that the ultimate illustration of the certainty of the Haggadah is that, as you put it, the son who asked the most challenging question of all is called wicked. And you write, actually, his question is not even answered, it is scorned. Yeah. So how do we take that and put that side by side with the fact you teach now for the Straus Center course on Mendelssohn in America, and we discuss the development of both Jews and non-Jews, of a series of ideas that give birth to a pluralistic society, a society that in many ways we do celebrate. So is there a tension between these two approaches? Are they reconcilable?
Look, I think, to be perfectly honest, I think that when it comes to the wicked son, it's not the son who was wicked, it's the person who wrote the answer to the son that was wicked. Because the son was not responded to, he was policed. And he was told, I mean...
Is that what you tell your son about the wicked son?
No. Yeah. I don't like the wicked son passage at all. But I'll tell you why. Yeah. Because the most important thing to know about something is not where does it come from, or what is the origin of the idea, or its provenance, or who proposed it, but whether or not it's actually true or false. And, there's a sentence in the Rambam that actually changed my life in all sorts of ways. The sentence is, Kabel et ha'emet mimi she'omro. Accept the truth from whoever utters it. Now that, of course, completely revolutionizes contemporary American political discussion, right? Because suddenly the most important thing...
I don't know if I agree. I'm going to have to watch my favorite cable show tonight to find out if I agree.
Well, this is it, to find out, right. Yeah. It may, I don't need to know if it's true. I need to know who says it. Right? And if it's an Ocher Yisrael, if an Ocher Yisrael says that it's now 8 o'clock, it can't be 8 o'clock. Right? It's just... And the Rambam sentence is about the primacy of the search for truth and about impartiality of a very difficult and hard kind. The wicked son, when he asks this question, he's actually told that he's committed a political felony. He's committed a political sin because his grammar, by means of his grammar, he's implied that he has seceded from the community. Now, whether or not he has seceded from the community, and there have been sons who have seceded from the community, the most important thing first to find out is whether what he's proposing is true or not. In other words...
what argument is he making, the wicked son?
Well, look, as I say, I think that whole thing is rigged. And I don't, the use of the third person, plural, as far as I'm concerned, is not a sufficient evidence
that he's
being of kfira, of being a kofer
be'ikar. The wise son also uses the third, Ma'ava asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu etchem.
We use it all the time. We use it all the time.
Right, so I would offer, just as a rejoinder, just building on what you said before, and this is, I think, in the Or Sameach, in other words, that he notes that if you look actually at the verbs of the four questions in which they're phrased actually in the Torah, one of them there is no question, that's the Sheni Yodei Lishol. But two of them are from V'haya ki yishalcha bincha machar, mazot, V'haya ki yishal bincha. There the verb is he will ask. Whereas with the pasuk that is being used for the Ben Rasha, there the phrase is V'haya ki yomru aleichem b'neichem mahavodah azot lachem. When your sons will say to you, what is this act? What is this avodah that you are doing? In other words, what the rabbis are picking up on is that it's not the statement itself, it's that it's a statement rather than a question. It's something that's not in search of an answer. And that's That's what's wicked about it.
I got to say, it's no way of keeping our children close to have that. I mean, and there are many things that Jews practice that to any perfectly reasonable, not just child but adult, might provoke, incredulity. We do some bizarre things. I once took my son to see Kaporos on Coney Island Avenue, which...
Did you actually do it? That's what I want to know.
No.
Okay.
No.
But did you buy a fish to take home in your bathtub for gefilte fish?
I'm a highbrow Galiciana, not a peasant Galiciana. No. But and he said to me, basically, what on earth is that? In the tone of the Ben Russia. And it was a perfectly...
And you did not punch out his teeth, is what you're saying.
I did not, or sharpen them, or take him to the orthodontist or anything. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I think one could suggest that maybe we don't assume that our parents tell us the truth all the time, but our first reaction should actually be, perhaps there is an explanation for this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I don't think that generosity, that intellectual generosity, was practiced towards the Ben Russia, towards the wicked son. I think he was summarily dismissed. And again, it is a kind of political exclusion. The smarter thing would have been to hear out the substance of whatever his wickedness was, and then to argue with him and to refute it. It is not that hard frequently to refute wickedness. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons that I think that Hillels are wrong to exclude BDS from. I don't see. I think that all views should be heard, and that views like BDS, which are complete historical and philosophical rubbish, are very easy to refute. And by practicing this act of exclusion, one gives the impression of actually being somehow afraid of the argument. And I don't think we need to be afraid of the argument. So too bad for the wicked son. Yeah.
So that's actually a great segue to the next question I wanted to raise, which is that you've written that all too often American Jews can't help but sit at the Seder and apply the Haggadah story to contemporary political issues. So the midwives against Pharaoh is about civil disobedience. Halach ma'anya kol dechvin yetev yechal is just about feeding the hungry. Not that you're against feeding the hungry, but that's not necessarily the point of the passage. You write as follows. You write, talk of politics will hardly make this night different from all other nights, especially in a community whose Jewish identity is madly over-politicized. End quote. Right. I'm very sympathetic to this point. At the same time, it would seem to me that the Haggadah is profoundly political text. In fact, at a time when most rabbinic texts are apolitical because they're being written by powerless Jews, this is maybe the most political rabbinic text there is because it focuses on expressly political concepts like freedom, nationhood, covenant, law. And there's no question, right, that this story has had a political impact on the world.
Oh, there's no question about that at all.
Benjamin Franklin's suggestion for a seal for the United States, Pharaoh at the Red Sea, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God.
The Dutch Republic fighting Spain, African-American churches.
So then how can we not help? So then what's the problem?
The problem it took me years to think this through, and I still think about it. There's no question that the story is one of political emancipation. There's no question about that, of going from slavery to freedom. But there are two things to be said about this. One of them, this took me, as I say, years to understand. The exodus from Egypt, the emancipation, the purpose of the emancipation, even though it was a historical event, if you read the Chumash carefully and you read the Haggadah, it was a historical event that was designed to prove certain metaphysical truths. I was raised on the idea that Pesach is, either a good left-wing holiday, if you want to put it that way. meaning that, it's from slavery to freedom. But in fact, the miracle of the Exodus from Egypt, if you read the text in the Bible, was performed by God to prove to the Jewish people that God is God and that miracles are possible. So that, let me just finish, because
Sure.
So that the more I came to think about it, the more I realized that whereas it's incontrovertible, the political dimension is incontrovertible, the purpose of this freedom was sanctity. So for example, you get certain, by the standards of contemporary political concepts, contemporary political discourse, you get certain paradoxes. For example, shlachet ami v'ya'avduni, right? Which basically means free my people so that they can serve me. They're not going to serve you anymore, they're going to serve me, right? Now that is, to me, the single most important point about the Exodus from Egypt. It was a transition from an illegitimate and inhumane servitude to a legitimate and humane servitude. Moreover, recognizing this point also reveals something fundamental about the nature of emancipation, of all political emancipations, which is that freedom is always just the beginning of the story and not the end. There are many things you can do with freedom. We see this, for example, in the contemporary world. We saw it with the collapse of the Arab Spring. We see it in other emancipations, in other societies, where you discover that freedom and democracy are not only not the same thing, but freedom may be used for anti-democratic purposes.
French Revolution.
And the free road to democracy takes a very long time and is a very rough road. So that the whole political reading of the Exodus, which, as I say, is undeniable, seems to, and Abravanel, again, I go back to my favorite commentator, he asks over and over again in his commentary, it's a wonderful question, which is, the story always ends with us being brought to the land, right? Shech nisanu le'eretz Yisrael, lahaviotanu, and so on. And he asks 2 or 3 times in his commentary, he said, well, that's all very nice, but we're in Galut, so why is this of any use to us? If the story was
especially
entirely...
someone like him who lived basically a life story.
Of course, we'll get to that. But if the story is just political, right, then the story either hasn't ended or it's failed.
Why are we doing it now?
The emancipation, we don't experience this emancipation, because in some sense we're back in Egypt. So his answer to this, which is an answer that I think is right, is that the Exodus from Egypt, whereas it was a political emancipation, was more profoundly a historical event that was designed to teach certain meta-historical truths, certain philosophical truths, certain metaphysical truths. And Abravanel, for him, it's the existence of God, and of course the creation of the world, because the miracles always prove God's power and the existence of prophecy. For him, those are the 3 metaphysical truths that it was the purpose of the Exodus to establish. Because for him, first expelled from Portugal to Spain, and then from Spain to Naples, and then expelled from Naples by the French, and wandering around Italy until he finally settles in Venice. For him, there's a great, if you read his commentary, especially, there's a beautiful, long, poetic introduction.
Just to note, this is your favorite commentary.
Of all of them.
Abravanel is your go-to.
Zevach Pesach. Zevach Pesach.
Is your go-to.
Yeah, it's called Zevach Pesach, and as he says, there's this long, beautiful historical poem, autobiographical poem.
Utilizing psukim from all over Tanakh.
In which he recounts his experience. And, I was in Portugal, they threw me out into Spain. I was in Spain. At one point, he even says, I think I'm getting it right, Haya Hashem le'oyev, laharog, lahashmid, laharogu, la'abed et kol hayudim.
Right.
And he writes at the end that he calls it Zevach Pesach, and he says it's Zivchei Hashem beruach nishbera. These are offerings to God by a broken spirit. by a broken spirit. And so his question, well, all this political stuff is all very nice, but look at us now. We don't have it. And so, as I say, I tend to think that regardless of his historical or our historical circumstances, which are, of course, much happier than his ever were, I tend to think that the real lesson of the Haggadah, the most profound lesson, surprisingly enough, is not about history. It's actually that history does not have the last word, because history is one of our avenues of access to what is above and beyond history, which is whatever is metaphysically the case.
But what I hear a little bit, though, there is that there are intense political lessons to be drawn, just those lessons may be very much in contradiction of contemporary secularism.
In some ways they are. I remember years ago I had a debate with my beloved friend Michael Walzer, who wrote a book called Exodus and Revolution,
right.
A very fine book in which he used the Exodus story, and he did so not just as a political philosopher, but as a loyal Jew who loved his tradition, as a paradigm for political emancipation. Right. And I said to him, there's one character you left out of your book.
God.
And he said, who? And I said, God.
Yeah. It's a minor character in
well,
the story,
it
right?
certainly, I have to say, reduces the relevance, the utility
right.
of the Exodus from Egypt as a paradigm for political emancipation. Because, we had, there was someone acting on behalf of the slaves that all subsequent slaves could not count on in that way. It became an interpretation so that you go from Biyad Chazakah Vizroa Netuya, right, in Egypt, to, what we just read, the verse in the whole Tanakh that I regard as the only verse in the Tanakh that we could have spoken to, which is Umi Yodea im la'et kazoti gat lamalchut. When Mordechai says to Esther, who knows if it was for this hour that you became queen, meaning they don't know. Everyone else in the Bible almost knows everything because they've been told either by God or by a prophet. And Mordechai is like us. And what does that mean? That if you're going to find God in the book of Esther, what do you have to do? You have to interpret. But the Jews in the desert, the Jews in Egypt, no interpretation was required.
But isn't there, just to push again one more time, that could one make the argument that the central political lesson of the Haggadah is that true freedom cannot come without recognizing the authority of God? Or, for example, some have argued that the success of the American Revolution, in contrast to the French or Russian, lies in the fact that it was not a purely secular revolution, that these stories did play a role. Isn't that, and that this is in direct contention with secular liberalism, much as, or just contemporary secularism. Liberalism is not a good word, I shouldn't use that word, but contemporary secularism, much as, the word tikkun olam is thrown around, without mentioning that the phrase, of course, is litaken olam b'malchut shakai.
Well, it's actually, we'll talk about tikkun, it's even worse than that. But, but no, I think you're right. First, that the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim certainly repudiates the old secular dogma that there can be no intrinsic association of freedom with religion. I think that's right. And I think that this country and the revolution in world history that best exemplifies that, of course, is the American Revolution. Right. Though it must be said that the people who first came to this country, the Puritans, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Jamestown, they came here because they wanted the freedom to persecute people their way.
Right.
So that's,
and we celebrate that every Thanksgiving.
Well,
right?
I don't celebrate it, even though in 5th grade at the Yeshiva of Flatbush, we did a Thanksgiving play, all in Hebrew, and my line in my pilgrim costume was to raise my hand and say, Shalom Massasoit. I mean, that was just... but the first real American, the founder of this country was Roger Williams.
Right.
Roger Williams is the one.
You've pointed this out to me before. Was one of the true founding fathers.
Is the real founder. You don't have Jefferson without Williams.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, a real revolution on precisely this. Yeah. So one, yes, the secular idea that religion is ipso facto dictatorial, And freedom is or revolution is or emancipation is ipso facto anti-clerical and anti-religious. Yetziat Mitzrayim has a different idea.
Right.
The question
And as Tocqueville notes, America understood that,
yes,
right?
yes. The question, however, and there is also, it must be said, this is true at a more philosophical or Kantian level, according to which the only legitimate and proper use of freedom is to subject yourself to a law.
Right.
That is the expression of, that is the highest expression of freedom.
Otherwise, it's barbaric freedom.
Barbaric, anarchic, chaotic, call it what you want. Trumpian, I mean, just call it what you want.
I mean, it's not like somebody would shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue or something.
No,
just because he
exactly,
wanted
exactly.
To, right? Yeah.
I mean, no, but still, there is the question again of whether what the Haggadah means by freedom is what we mean by freedom. We have a concept of political liberty, right? And I'm not convinced that that concept exists in our earliest sources except by extrapolation and metaphor. So I don't have to tell you that the famous sentence on the Liberty Bell, right? Karatem dror ba'aretz, thou shalt proclaim freedom throughout the land. That was not about political liberty. That was about economic liberty. Right. It was actually about organizing a kind of sustainable, mildly free economy.
Right.
So so it is still important to experience a certain tension between our modern American liberal in the large sense concept of political liberty and shlachet ami v'ya'avduni. I think that's something else. And I think, and this is another example for me that, there is Americanism, there is Judaism or Jewishness, there are overlaps, but they're not identical. And they're never identical. All religion is countercultural, and we are an autonomous element in world history of our own, and we have our own concepts, and they diverge, or they converge, or they diverge from the concepts of cultures within which we live. And so I think it is important to remember that even the political interpretation of the Haggadah isn't talking about the political liberty that we're talking about, et cetera.
We can't just collapse the...
I don't think so. I think it's very important not to.
Between the two. Let's talk, if the Haggadah is such a central book, it would be good to have a good translation of it.
Actually, it'd be better if no translation was needed.
Well, all right, for sure.
Right.
So
not in our lifetime.
Right, so let's talk about that. So you noted in your piece that all translation is interpretation because it's a choice among meanings. And you furthermore note that most English translations by Jews of the Haggadah and in general of Hebrew texts, translations in English are, well, terrible.
More or less.
You write, in 1770, the first Haggadah published in London included its first translation into English. The first American Haggadah, produced in 1837, also had an accompanying translation into English. There have been many English translations since most of them mediocre or worse. Mm-hmm. And yet we have something like the King James Bible, which is such gorgeous literature, that Henry Higgins can say in My Fair Lady, English is the language of Shakespeare and the Bible.
It is, but as you know, it's very important.
So where did they succeed? Why are we failing?
Well, I don't know that, look, I think there have been good English translations of the Bible. I think that there have been, by my lights,
what would those be?
I think that the Leeser translation is not terrible, I have to say. I think Robert Alter's translation is not terrible. I think that there are good translations of our Bible into German also. It can be done. I once wanted to write an essay, I never wrote it, about how a Jew should read the King James Bible. Because the King James Bible, not in the portions of the Bible we're talking about, not in Shmot, it's full of Christological echoes and meanings. Whenever I quote a biblical verse in English, I first go to the King James, and I'd say 4 out of 10 times I revise the King James slightly because I smell some Christianity in the translation, and I'm talking about the Hebrew Bible. And so I'm grateful. I mean, their poetic, linguistic, verbal understanding was profound. And by the way, English was a much better and more beautiful language in that period.
If I'm doing a funeral and we're doing a psalm in Hebrew and English, I will always look to the King.
Yeah,
I don't know if a rabbi
absolutely.
can say that, but I always
Well, not just
go
the
to
King James. If you look
first.
at the translations of the Psalms into English generally,
Right.
they are the most exquisite. I mean, Sir Philip Sidney is my single favorite example of all, the 16th century poet. His sister was a great translator of Tehillim, and Niki Kapayim, she translates as hurtless hands. It's absolutely beautiful. And the more you think about the phrase hurtless hands, that's actually what Niki Kapayim.
That's the pshat,
They
right?
never hurt anybody. That's what it is. They never transgressed. They never violated. So no, there's a lot of look. The translation has been.
So you like that more than the art scroll Shir HaShirim? I know this is what you're saying.
Look, I'm not yet at the Madrega when I can understand the art scroll. I'm really not. I mean, one day, God willing, I will be able. I mean, a translation. The art scroll in Sheker Hasus Lichua, right? It's one of the Shir Shoyom, I think.
Yeah.
The art scroll translates as Sham is the horse for salvation. Now, that's not English. That's not anything. I mean, and it's ugly beyond belief, but never mind that. No, what I wanted to say is, look, the translation has been a primary activity of Jewish intellectuals and since the beginning. There's always been problems with levels of Hebrew literacy, though never, ever the kind of problems that we experience in our benighted Jewry here in America, which I regard as the first significant Jewry that actually believed and conducted itself as if it could receive, develop, and transmit the Jewish tradition, not in a Jewish language, which I regard as a crime against our tradition, a crime. But there were always complaints. And so, for example, as you know, in the ancient synagogue, there was a figure called the Meturgeman, who was an individual who every 3 psukim during the laning, during the Kriyat Torah, would have to pause it and translate those 3 verses into either Aramaic or Greek.
Right.
Because the Olam, if you pardon me here, but the Olam didn't know, couldn't understand it. And if you study, I mean, there's a great book that has yet to be written about the history of the literacy of the people of the book. I mean, you know, and so I'm not against translation. I certainly want translation to exist because I don't want Jews to be shut out completely of their tradition. Right. There are things that never get across. Anyone who's read the Song of Songs and hasn't read Shir HaShirim has no idea of the beauty and the power of that book. No idea. And by the way, this is not just true of translations from that. I have tried, there's a great Russian poet called Osip Mandelstam, and I have tried to read Osip Mandelstam in English for decades, and I put 5 different translations next to each other, and I gotta say, it doesn't come across. All my Russian friends say that it is pure music. It isn't in English. So
you've translated, you have Israeli poets who are friends of yours.
I translate Hebrew poems and often, and there are certain Hebrew poets that I won't go near because it's impossible. Others, you have to make sacrifices. One of my greatest triumphs of the last 5 years as a Jew was to actually manage to translate a short, beautiful love poem by Bialik into English and keep the rhyme, which left me feeling really good. Really good. It all depends. But what I'm saying is the Moreh Nevuchim, right? The Moreh Nevuchim changed Jewish intellectual life, revolutionized Judaism, not in the Judeo-Arabic in which the Rambam wrote it, but in Shmuel ibn Tibbon's translation, right? We know now that Ibn Tibbon's translation was not altogether precise.
Kuzari also was read in Hebrew.
By his father, by Yehuda ibn Tibbon. And the Tibbonides, as they're called, actually revolutionized Jewish culture with all these translations. But people who know the Arabic are certain that Shlomo Penis's translation of the Guide of the Perplexed into English is infinitely superior to Shmuel ibn Tibbon's translation into Hebrew. But that Hebrew translation was the only avenue of access that Jews had to this great book, to this masterpiece, and it also created philosophical Hebrew. So translation is a hugely important thing, but what's pathetic is how desperately the American Jewish community needs it. That's what's really pathetic.
Is there a Haggadah that you would recommend for the
I don't
modern
have any.
Haggadah?
No, I don't have any favorite translation of the Haggadah. I have some very unfavorite ones, but I don't have. And no. And I have to say, at this point in my life, with the time left to me, I have no time for translations of things into English that I actually can read in Hebrew. Right. I mean, Judaism takes place in a language of its own, right? That's our air. And people, as a Jew, I would prefer to live in Hebrew because that's the language in which our tradition was made.
Yeah. So that lead into just the final point, which is actually your response. You wrote this in your response to some of the angry letters that were written in reaction to your negative review of this translation. And in addressing why it was so important for a translation and interpretation to be true to the spirit of what the book is in the first place, and why that translation was not, and yet reflected certain maladies in the American Jewish community. You wrote as follows. You wrote, "This deep and beautiful tradition of ours has made it all the way to us after a journey of over 2,000 years. It was not inevitable that this would be so. It was an agonizing journey. Many forces tried to prevent the tradition from surviving this far or at all, but the persecutions of the Jews did not prevail against the preservationist genius of the Jews. They preserved their tradition because they prized it, not because they were persecuted. The stubborn historical truth is that the primary instrument of Jewish preservation and Jewish development has been Jewish knowledge attended by Jewish practice." And so just want to end by asking, is there what out there actually does give you hope and inspires you?
Well, I'll tell you.
And what should we bear in our minds as we prepare for the Seder ourselves, in your view?
The past gives me more hope than the future does, I have to tell you. Look.
That's not very hopeful.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I think that more of the Jewish tradition is slipping through our fingers in these conditions of prosperity and security than we ever lost in conditions of persecution and poverty. By orders of magnitude. It's shocking to me how ignorant American Jews are, especially because they are otherwise diabolically energetic people who know how to learn a backhand in 2 weeks and climb Everest, and on the way down from the mountain start a hedge fund. So, we're talking about people who, if they put their mind to knowing something, they know just how to go about it. So I remain permanently shocked by the level of ignorance with which the American Jewish community is prepared to proceed. Really permanently shocked. There are 250,000 Jewish kids in day schools, about. If you subtract the Orthodox, the number is really, really heartbreaking. I should add, however, that is not another reason for the Orthodox to engage in another round of self-love, for the simple reason that the impact of Orthodoxy's ability to develop itself, transmit itself, create children and knowledgeable, and etc., is not particularly relevant to the majority of the American Jewish community. The Orthodox are what, 15%? Maybe one day they'll be 25%. But I am not prepared to write off 75% of our brothers and sisters because they don't send their kids to day school. And I'm not prepared to just sit and congratulate the Orthodox on how absolutely stupendous a job they're doing when most of our community is wallowing in ignorance. These are our brothers and sisters, and we've got to think about this. And so I'm very, very worried, not that Judaism or Jewishness will disappear, I'm worried about the quality of the Jewish identity that will exist. As I wrote there, I think Jewish identity is largely political now. I think it's become much too ethnic since the 1960s. We've ethnicized our identity so that we find all expressions of ethnicity equally valuable, equally authentic, which they are. But that's just an anthropological definition of ourselves, right? You love Knishes, I love Maimonides, and together we're Jews, right? So that leads, the ethnic definition of our identity leads to a kind of internal relativism, whereby everything that's Jewish is great, But some things are greater than others, and some things are more necessary to the survival of the tradition than others. And you cannot raise children on knishes or klezmer or politics. You cannot certainly raise children on Jerry Seinfeld. Jewish identity is not a psychology. For most of American culture, Jewish identity is a psychology. From Woody Allen to Jerry Seinfeld to Larry David to Philip Roth, it's a psychology that primarily revolves around Jewish males who have been permanently arrested in adolescence in their relations to women, right? Which is not an acme of civilization, right? So I think that we are now content with definitions of our identity that fall so far short of what we used to have. And again, I know that, things were different, blah, blah, blah. But it can't be that Tacitus and Spinoza and Sartre and others were right. It can't be, in fact, we know they were wrong. Anti-Semitism is not what kept Jews Jewish. Right. It can't be that we finally come to a country, to a host country, in which we are so secure. I mean, if Merrick Garland gets appointed to the court, there will be 4 Jews on the court. I'm beginning to worry about token goyim on the court. I mean, right?
And his name is Merrick Garland. What's up with that?
He's under deep cover. That was a decision we made a long time ago.
He's like a Morano, maybe.
This decision was made when he was born.
Morano, yeah.
I can't discuss it.
That's like the Jackie Mason line. He says, in America, they want to out-Gentile the Gentiles. I met a Jew. Her name was Crucifix Finkelstein.
Yeah, exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
No, but we are now, so we come to a place that is more hospitable, not only welcoming to us. This is the first diaspora that we have ever lived in which not only are we not punished for difference, we're rewarded for difference because of the hyphen. So that when Bernie Sanders says, I'm the son of Polish immigrants, we all say, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're the son of something a little more specific than that, right? A little more specific. But this is the first diaspora in which we are rewarded.
It's a cruel irony.
No erasure is required. Yes. So where no erasure is required,
and that was
we
true,
go
actually,
on and erase
from
and
the
erase
moment
and
of the
erase.
founders of this synagogue, actually, which is what's so incredible to the point.
So, it's so perverse.
So
it amounts to a kind of treason, I have to tell you. I regard it as treasonous to the Jewish tradition. I really do.
So you have a son who's just become bar mitzvah last year. I had the privilege of presiding there, one of the great moments in my rabbinic life. So when you do the mitzvah, v'yigarat lebincha bayom hahu, so what is the central lesson that you seek to convey at the Seder?
At the Seder, I tend to want him to think, as I said, more about religious questions than political questions. We talk about politics all the time. I mean, and so does every other living, breathing American Jew. I mean, all the time, to the point where it's time for us to remember the wisdom of certain conservative thinkers about the limits of politics. No, I read that stuff too. No, it's just...
This is great evening, yeah.
No, it's, a little oak shot wouldn't kill some Jews, but not too much. Yeah. No, so I think that we have to remember the limits of politics, and I'm not going to sit down with my boy at the Seder and talk politics in one form or another. I don't want to do that. Right. I don't want to. It's hard enough. I'm telling you, it's hard enough to get any Jews to stop talking about politics. Right. I mean, we have a rule, in my shul. We have one general rule, which is that politics cannot be the subject of a drasha. I mean, I grew up in a shul, which I'm not going to name, in which the proof text for every Shabbos drasha came from that morning's New York Times. And the New York Times, the last time I looked, is not one of the canonical Jewish texts. I know there are Jews who think differently, judging by the most emailed column. But, so no, I'm actually desperate to move away from this politicization and to try to get my boy, but also other Jews, to actually learn what it is to think religiously, to think about actual religious concepts that cannot be translated into inyana diyoma. The problem I see this all the time with American Jews. They all know what their opinion of Obama is, what their opinion of Netanyahu is, whether they were for the Iran deal or against the Iran deal. But if you woke them up in the middle of the night and said, Who are the Jewish people? What is Zionism? Why is there a Jewish state? What is the meaning of the Jewish state? What does the Jewish state have to do with the land of Israel? What does the land of Israel have to do with Judaism? They would not know how to begin an answer because they don't know. American Jews no longer focus on first principles. They no longer, now I know there's Twitter and there's social media and there's CNN, I know that. But if you look at Jewish history, one of the most edifying, stirring lessons of Jewish history is that no, certainly medieval Jewish community that I've ever studied, ever took the failings of the host culture as an excuse to relax their standards for themselves. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Quite the contrary, adarabba, because they're surrounded by cultures whose moral failings sometimes are spectacular, especially in their treatment of the Jews themselves, it has the opposite effect. It has the opposite effect. So I think that this...
so your focus at the Seder then will be
about miracles and God and the relationship of, we can talk about spiritual power, historical power, but no, I don't want to talk about, as I say, we talk about it all the time. And the Jewish community is choking on politics. Right. It's the civil religion of American Jewry. It really is.
So it is a night dedicated, in other words, to God.
Yeah.
It is a night dedicated.
Well, to God in history.
God in history.
And to the whole cluster of questions and problems and tensions that the phrase God in history suggests. That's what we'll talk about.
On that religious note.
We have questions?
Yes? We don't.
No?
No, that's not part of the... We don't believe in questions. We
in
only
the spirit
believe
of Pesach, we're
in
taking
the spirit
no
of
questions.
Pesach, no questions.
No questions.
Only answers,
no
which
questions.
we've provided
That's
with
right.
great
No
certainty,
questions.
deserving of the Haggadah.
Good,
Please
good.
join me in thanking our guests. Thank you all for coming. We hope to see you on Sunday at 10 a.m. to hear the Chief Rabbi.